Boyfriend skipped my birthday claiming he was broke, but spent $200 at a festival and left me feeling like an afterthought. My boyfriend and I have been together for just over 4 years, and things have changed a bit since he recently moved into an apartment with higher rent. Because of that, we don't go out as often, and lately, whenever we do, I usually end up paying. I have more expendable income after my own bills, so I honestly don't mind picking up the tab most of the time, but this recent situation has left me feeling miffed and a little hurt. Every year for my birthday, he makes a big deal about taking the night off work so that we can have dinner together. Afterward, he brings me to Pandora so I can pick out a new charm for my bracelet. It's our little tradition, something I look forward to, a sweet display that always makes me feel special. So about a week before my birthday, I was playfully trying to coax info out of him about where we'd be eating, teasing him because he always tries to surprise me with the plan. That's when he suddenly snapped, telling me he really did have to work this year, that he was broke, and couldn't afford to do anything for my birthday. The energy shifted instantly. I felt embarrassed and apologized right away. I told him it was okay, that we could just spend some time together on the weekend, maybe order pizza and relax in bed. I honestly just wanted to be with him. My birthday landed on a Thursday. He did have to work, and called me afterward to say happy birthday and apologize for not being able to buy me a present or go out. Again, I said it was fine and that I was looking forward to seeing him Saturday, just glad we'd get to hang out. Then he mentioned that we wouldn't be able to see each other until Saturday evening, because he'd gotten a ticket to a festival and was going with one of his buddies. That one took me by surprise. I knew he hadn't seen his friend in a while, and he has been working nonstop, so I let it slide. Saturday night comes, and he finally shows up at my place, arms full of 3 stuffed shopping bags. I asked about the festival, and he animatedly told me what a blast he had. Then, he began unpacking all the things he'd bought, pulling out shirts and memorabilia, talking excitedly about every item. Got this one, $10. This one was only $15. Oh, and this one, and this one. He rattled off the prices, item by item, and I could see the pile growing, getting more expensive with every shirt or poster. Altogether, he'd easily spent about $200 on festival merchandise. I sat there, quiet, fighting a burning sense of anger and disappointment. I didn't know what to say. Our sweet birthday tradition, the dinner and a Pandora charm, rarely cost more than $150, but it meant the world to me, seeing him come home with a haul of stuff he'd bought, after insisting he couldn't afford even a little celebration or gift for me, just really stung. All I could think was, you were able to spend $200 on yourself at a festival, but you couldn't spend anything on my birthday, on us? I hated that I felt so selfish for thinking that way, but I couldn't help it. Even yesterday when I saw him again and he was wearing one of his new festival shirts, I felt the whole thing bubble up inside me all over again. Update 1. I haven't talked to him about the festival and birthday fiasco. In fact, I haven't seen him in over 2 weeks, not intentionally, but because I had events scheduled for months that were set to fill my weekends. He was well aware of this. I see a therapist once a month, have since I was a kid, and just a few days after everything blew up, I unloaded all my frustrations in her office and ended up breaking down in tears. The truth hit me as I spoke. He'd been treating me less like a girlfriend and more like a sugar mama. When the realization finally sank in, I felt numb, used, and stupid for not seeing it sooner. All those months, it was right there. During the time I was busy and not seeing him, I took a deliberate mental break, hoping I'd finally find some clarity. Since I was always the one initiating contact, I figured ignoring him wouldn't be so difficult. Predictably, he seemed to notice my absence. Suddenly, he was flooding my phone with sweet messages, the same kind he'd sent at the very start of our relationship. Good morning texts. Random just thinking about you check-ins. All that fluffy honeymoon stuff. For a moment, I began to wonder if I'd been overthinking everything, that maybe all our issues were just a phase. But then, his actions always gave him away. He texted to say he missed me and wanted to come to my event on Saturday. Friday night, he was asking for the details, what time it started, where it was being held. He told me he couldn't wait to see me. I waited for him. He never showed. The disappointment hit me like a punch. I was heartbroken. I heard nothing from him until after I posted a photo on Instagram about finally being home. That's when he claimed he was sorry he missed me, that he'd just been busy. But his roommate let it slip that he'd spent the entire day at home playing video games. I kept comparing this version of him to the one I first fell for. He used to be so romantic, surprising me at work with muffins and coffee from my favorite cafe or showing up at 1 a.m. to help with trigonometry homework. When I broke my arm, he'd rush over during his lunch break to wash and brush my hair. He was my rock, my biggest supporter. Where had that man gone? I'm seeing him next weekend. I plan to lay everything out, all that I've been holding inside. Depending on his reaction, maybe, I'll give him a second chance. But it's just as likely I'll break up with him. I can't keep living like this. Being alone terrifies me. The thought of it could make me chicken out of ending things altogether. But I can't keep doing this. I can't. This is what happened. I decided I'd talk to him on the car ride back from his nephew's birthday party. I like his family and didn't want drama before the event, so I kept things light. The party was wonderful. He was attentive, sweet, acting just like he had in the beginning. On the way back, As conversation lulled, I took a breath to finally say what I'd rehearsed, but he beat me to it. He said he needed to talk first. He confessed that he'd felt guilty about how he'd been treating me for months, that he'd felt like a terrible boyfriend since Christmas. He mentioned feeling bad about letting me pay for things and not making time for me. There was more, but that's the gist of it. And then, on the way home, he made a turn I didn't recognize. I asked where we were going. He just said, "You'll see." We ended up at the mall. He parked and opened my door for me, then told me he wanted to make up for missing my birthday plans by taking me to Pandora to choose a charm. For a moment, I thought it was sweet. I thought maybe the rough patch was ending. But then I asked what made him do this now. My birthday had been almost a month ago. That's when he admitted he'd seen my post. He was certain, 98% sure, it was about us. I didn't even know he used Reddit. He mentioned he'd read my update, and that was why we were at Pandora. Suddenly the gesture felt manipulative. I confronted him, "So you're buying me jewelry because you know I'm fed up and thinking about breaking up? You haven't even apologized." He dodged the question, so I pressed again. That's when he snapped, saying, "I'm sorry you think I'm selfish because I bought myself some shit at a festival." Happy? It wasn't even an apology, he just pushed it back on me. It became so clear, this was never about my feelings, just about shutting me up so he wouldn't have to deal with the real issues. I told him that if he'd actually listened, he'd know the birthday tradition wasn't the problem. The problem was that he blew me off and we never spent time together, that I was tired of feeling like a bank and not a girlfriend. He just threw it back in my face, insisting I'd offered to pay, so I wasn't allowed to be upset. I'd had enough. I told him he could leave, that I was calling my brother for a ride. He told me to stop being ridiculous. As I walked away, he grabbed my wrist, hard. He'd never been physical before, but now, his nails were digging into my skin as he pleaded with me to just get in the car and stop making a scene. I kept telling him to let go, but he just called me crazy, getting angrier by the second. I kicked him. He loosened his grip just enough for me to twist free. I ran into the mall, heart pounding, and ducked into a dressing room, locking the door behind me. Once there, I broke down, sobbing on the floor, overwhelmed and shaken. I hadn't even noticed an attendant until I heard a knock and someone asking if I needed help. My response was barely coherent, but she slid a packet of tissues under the door anyway. I don't know how long I stayed there, crying and catching my breath on the cold tile. But as I sat there, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I deserved so much more than what I just walked away from. Update 2. When I finally unlocked the dressing room and stepped back into the world, my eyes were swollen and the fluorescent lights were unkind. The attendant, tiny, buzzcut, a soft sweater with a single loose thread at the wrist, didn't ask questions. She just waved someone over. A manager appeared with a radio and the practice comm you only ever see in emergencies and returns. They took me to a back office with a lopsided corkboard and a humming mini fridge and asked if I wanted water. I nodded and told them I needed to call my brother. I dialed and the second he heard my voice he said he was already in the car. Security asked if I wanted them to look for him. I didn't even have to say his name. The guy in the dark blue hat who grabbed her in the parking lot was apparently enough. They checked cameras, wrote things down, gently asked if I wanted the police. My hands were shaking too hard to uncap the pen they offered, so the manager wrote for me while I spelled everything out like I was back in a spelling bee I hadn't prepared for. The bruise was already printing itself on my skin in strange lavender shapes. I took pictures. They did too. My brother arrived like thunder, a big shape in the doorway with cold air hitting his shirt. He didn't say much. He just looked at my wrist, then at me, and then at the manager, and said, "We're going to urgent care." The police met us there. I gave a statement in an exam room that smelled faintly like antiseptic and oranges. A nurse dabbed something warm and brown over the crescents his nails left behind. The officer kept his voice low, explained the difference between a report and a protective order, and told me I didn't have to decide anything that second. I decided anyway. I slept at my brother's house that night with his girlfriend's dog pressed against my knees, a tiny furnace that sighed whenever I moved. Every time my phone lit up on the nightstand, I flinched. At first it was apologies, then it was anger, then it was the apology again, but bigger, as if capitalization could make it true. I didn't open any of them. I just turned the screen face down and listened to the dog snore. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, I realized I wasn't waiting for a ping anymore. Silence wasn't a cliff. It was a couch. At 8 a.m. I went to the courthouse with a to-go coffee that went cold in my hands before I even took 2 sips. There was a line of people who all looked like they'd slept badly. The clerk slid me forms under glass and I wrote my name so many times it started to look wrong. When it was my turn in front of the judge, my voice came out clear, like it belonged to someone else. I showed photos. I explained them all. I explained how he grabbed me and how I'd had to kick him to get free. The judge read, and nodded, and approved a temporary order. It was ink and paper and a stamp, and yet it felt like a door clicking shut in a way that made my shoulders drop. He showed up at my building anyway. He buzzed and buzzed. My phone lit up with the kind of number that makes your stomach go cold. Unknown caller, then my brother's name, then unknown caller again. I didn't answer. I called the non-emergency line and my building manager. The manager went downstairs with a fluorescent maintenance vest thrown over his pajama shirt like armor. By the time an officer came, my ex was pacing out front, a paper gift bag with a white rope handle dangling from his fingers. He put it down on the steps like a stray cat and backed away when the officer talked to him. They gave him the paper. He read it. He looked up at my window and I stepped back even though I knew he couldn't see me. The officer watched him leave. The bag stayed on the step like a dare. I left it there. My brother picked it up when he came over with a spare deadbolt. It wasn't from Pandora. It was a bag from a random accessory store with a necklace inside that looked like it came from an airport kiosk, still in a plastic sleeve. There was a note folded around it, written on the back of a receipt for a gas station soda and 2 lottery tickets. "You didn't let me make it right," it said. "Don't be dramatic." I didn't respond. My brother threw the bag in the trash and changed my locks while I stood there uselessly holding screws like a stagehand. His roommate texted me later. "I'm sorry," was the whole first message. Then, I wasn't there. I heard what happened. "I'll make sure he doesn't have the spare key." I didn't know he even had a key. The roommate offered to be the one to get the few things of his out of my place, a hoodie, an old video game, a shaving kit he never used. We arranged a pickup where I wouldn't have to see him. My brother did it. The exchange lasted all of 30 seconds in the parking lot of a pancake house. The sun was too bright. A woman in a red coat walked past and the syrup smell was so strong it made my teeth hurt. His mother called me that night from a number I didn't recognize. I didn't have the heart to ignore her. She sounded tired in that way that makes you imagine a kitchen table and a coffee mug held with both hands. She told me he'd been spinning out since Christmas, that she'd been worried, that she would keep him away. "I'm sorry," she said like she meant it. I told her I hoped he got help. Then I hung up and cried, not because I missed him but because grief doesn't always care who it belongs to. The next day I walked back into the mall in a clean sweater and a coat with deep pockets. I wanted to talk to the attendant and say, "Thank you." She was there, sweeping a handful of hangers into place, and when she saw me she brightened like I was a regular they liked. "You okay?" she asked, and I nodded. Then I did something that felt like a movie I would have rolled my eyes at a month ago. I went to Pandora. The girl behind the counter had shimmery eyeshadow and a name tag with a tiny star drawn next to her name. I told her I wanted a charm. "Something that means I did a hard thing," I said, and she didn't ask for the story. She just pulled out a tray and showed me a tiny padlock and a small lightning bolt. I picked the bolt. It was ridiculous and perfect. When she clicked it into place on my bracelet, it made a sound like a coin falling into a jar. I paid for it with my own card and didn't hate myself for it. That was new. I came home and canceled the subscriptions he'd been using that were still under my email, the streaming service, the game account I'd just put on my card this one time. It felt like pulling burrs out of a sweater one by one. My bank app made a cheerful little noise after each confirmation. I added up some totals and then closed the app because there was nothing to fix about what had already happened except the part that comes next. He emailed me once more through an address I didn't know, some throwaway that had his nickname in it. He said he'd never put hands on a woman like I was a courtroom and he was a witness raising his right hand. Then, in the next line, he said I made him do it, which told me more than I needed to know. I forwarded it to the case number and then made myself an omelet in a pan that was finally just mine again. The bruise on my wrist turned yellow, then green, then faded until only I knew where it had been. My therapist squeezed me into an extra appointment. I sat on her couch and told her I bought my own charm and we both laughed too hard at that for a minute. She asked me what I wanted next. I said I wanted to sleep and mean it. That night, I did. I woke up once out of habit and then drifted right back. No looming, no waiting. Just quiet. I lay there and listened to the fridge hum and I felt something I hadn't in a long time. The room felt big, and I didn't feel small inside it. There's a court date in 2 weeks for the order. I don't know how his side of the story will go. I do know mine, and I know where my keys are, and I know exactly how it sounds when a tiny lightning bolt clicks into place. It's the sound of me deciding to be okay, even if the person I wanted to do that with didn't want it with me. It's the sound of a tradition ending and a new one I'm building with my own hands. I don't need a surprise anymore. I just need the life where I never have to run into a dressing room again. I can do that. I am doing it. Update 3. Court smelled like lemon cleaner and old paper, the kind that whispers when you flip it. I wore the same coat, the one with the deep pockets, and my bracelet. The lightning bolt hung cool and small against my wrist like a secret. Security made me put my keys in a gray plastic bin, but the guard waved at the charm. "Jewelry can stay on," he said, and I wanted to tell him it wasn't jewelry, not really, but I just nodded and kept moving. The waiting area was a low murmur, shoes scuffing, people clutching folders the way you clutch a cliff edge. My brother sat beside me and tried to pretend the vending machine coffee wasn't terrible. He kept offering me almonds from a crinkly bag like we were at a movie and we were going to miss the good part. An officer with a tidy mustache called names. We were a lineup of lives he didn't get to keep. He was late. I knew he'd come anyway. You can tell when a storm is going to break even with the blinds shut. He slid into the hallway with his mother half a step behind him like a shadow that loved him. He had on one of the festival shirts, the dark one with the neon print that he said was only $15, the numbers blooming in my head like mold. He looked at me and then at the floor and then at me again. The bailiff shifted just enough to remind the heir how to behave. We went in. The judge wore a tie with little blue squares and read our names like he'd read them before somewhere else in a different year. His voice was ordinary in the way bridges are strong. I told my part. The words didn't climb over each other this time. They lined up and waited for their turn. I showed the photos. I showed the yellowed shape of the bruise before it decided to leave. I handed over the security report with the case number in the corner. The mall manager had printed a still from the camera, gray shapes in a box, his hand a claw slice across my wrist. The judge leaned forward like he wanted to get closer to the math of it. He asked if I had witnesses. The roommate was there. He looked like he hadn't slept because guilt can look exactly like insomnia if you tilt your head. He told the judge about the spare key and how he'd taken it back. He told him about the day I stood waiting at my own event and my ex stayed home leveling up a made-up life. He told me she wouldn't leave, and the words landed heavy and didn't bounce. My mall attendant couldn't come. Retail doesn't know about court schedules, but she'd written a note on lined paper and signed it in careful, round letters, and that helped. There was a line about tissues sliding under a door. It read like a small kindness, because it was. Then it was his turn. He didn't have a lawyer, just a shirt and a voice I recognized even when it tried to be new. He said he'd never put hands on a woman. He said I had misunderstood. He said I was making him sound like a monster when he was just upset. The judge listened the way you listen to a microwave when you think you forgot to put the fork in. My ex gestured and the cuff of his sleeve rode up and there was ink I didn't remember, a jagged little crown at his wrist. I was trying to guide her to the car, he said, like women are shopping carts. The judge asked him a simple question: why did she have to kick you to get free? He opened his mouth and closed it again. Somewhere, stupidly, I thought of that lopsided corkboard in the mall office and the pushpins like little puncture wounds holding things in place. The judge looked from him to the photo and back, the way you look at a map and then at the road ahead. He granted the order for a year: stay away, no contact in any form, not even smoke signals. He spoke with his stamp and with the sharp sound paper makes when it gets a new purpose. My breath went out of me so quietly I didn't hear it until it was gone. We left in a small river of other people who were also leaving with papers pressed flat to their chests. In the hallway, his mother touched my elbow, so lightly a moth would have weighed more. I'm sorry, she said again, the words rung out, and I nodded because grief respects grief even when it's on the wrong team. In the parking lot, my brother unlocked the car by remote and the little lights blinked like approval. We got in. My phone buzzed on cue, a Venmo request for 1 cent with a note that said just talk to me. I screenshot it and sent it to the officer whose card I had crumpled in my wallet, the corner soft now from being handled. He called me back before we were off the courthouse block. That counts, he said, and asked permission to add it to the file. He sounded like someone who had said that sentence dozens of times and wasn't tired of being the one who did. The afternoon stretched open. I didn't know what to do with hands that didn't have to be brave right then, so I used them. I went to the post office and filled out the little blue form to change the lock on my mailbox because he'd known too many keys that belonged to me. The clerk wore glasses on a chain and a sweater with tiny embroidered cherries marching along the hem. She said it would be a week and slid the form into a stack that looked like a deck of small exits. I bought a new phone case on the way home that looks like a slice of sky. The girl at the counter asked if I wanted a screen protector and I laughed too hard and said, yes, please, and she didn't ask why. I changed my number in a parking lot with a slow bar of service ticking across, a caterpillar crawling to a leaf. At home, my apartment felt different in that way a haircut can trick you into thinking your face changed too. The deadbolt slid into place with a less metallic sound, the new one my brother installed. I stood in the kitchen and listened to the fridge hum and the traffic outside and the hollow knock my neighbor gives when she wants to ask for sugar but pretends she's there to borrow tape. She brought both, actually. I gave her a set of the new spare keys because her name is Joan and she reminds me of someone who keeps promises in jars labeled correctly. She cried when I put them in her hand and then pretended she had something in her eye so we wouldn't have to acknowledge it. I went back to the mall after work 2 days later with a little pink bakery box because thank you is sometimes powdered sugar on a tongue. The attendant, buzzcut, sweater replaced with a shirt covered in tiny suns, grinned when she saw me and said, you look different, like a compliment, like a diagnosis. We sat on a bench between stores and ate cream puffs like they were a mission. I gave her a cheap keychain shaped like a lightning bolt that I'd found at the kiosk that sells phone cases and zodiac necklaces. She clipped it onto her lanyard and shook it a little so it chimed. You did a hard thing, she said, and I said, so did you. I went back to Pandora too, ridiculous, I know, but the girl with the shimmery eyeshadow recognized me and said, hi again, like we'd met at a bus stop and kept making that bus show up. I asked to see the padlock. I'd chosen the bolt last time because I needed the idea of crackling sky, but the lock felt right now, solid, small weight, a click that sounded like an answer. She snapped it onto the bracelet and it made that coin into jar sound again and I breathed in just to see what it felt like. It felt like the first page of a blank notebook. He tried one more time. An email from a new address with my old nickname in the subject line. He attached a photo of the gift bag on his passenger seat like proof that he had meant a thing he hadn't done. I forwarded it to the case number and then blocked the address and then ate leftover pasta standing up at the counter because sometimes dignity looks like reheating something in a pan. At night, the quiet sits with me without fidgeting. I sleep, and when I wake up, my phone sleeps too, and the silence isn't a threat. I went for a walk on Saturday morning through a neighborhood estate sale and bought a mug with a chip that looks like a bite out of the moon. A dog in a sweater sniffed my shoes and looked pleased with itself. A little boy held up a plastic dinosaur and told his grandma its name was Thunder. I touched the bolt on my wrist and tried the name on, just to see. It fit. This morning, before work, I stopped at the courthouse again because my therapist told me about a volunteer desk where people help fill out forms. I wasn't going to stay, but there was a woman ahead of me who didn't have a pen and couldn't remember a zip code under pressure, and my hands already knew which line was the date and which was the signature. We sat together and she cried in that careful way you do when you don't want your mascara to run, and I didn't tell her anything about me except it's okay to take your time. We finished 3 forms in an hour, slower than a machine would have done it, but that wasn't the point. On my way out, the officer with the mustache lifted his chin like we were neighbors now. "How's the charm?" he asked, not meaning the jewelry. I said, "Working," and he smiled like he understood, then tipped his head toward the door. The world outside was the same size as yesterday and somehow bigger. My keys felt good in my pocket, familiar and right. Later today, I'll go buy eggs because I'm out, and maybe basil if it looks alive. I'll make myself dinner in the pan that is only mine, and it won't be a declaration, just a plate. The lightning bolt sits at my pulse and the padlock minds its own business. I do too. I am, to my own surprise, not waiting anymore. Update 4. A storm came in at 3 a.m. like it had an appointment. The first flash lit up my ceiling in slices and the thunder arrived with its own heavy suitcase a few breaths later. I lay there and counted between them the way my dad taught me when I was little: 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, like math could make the sky behave. The lightning bolt on my bracelet winked at me in the dark and for once I didn't feel hunted by it. I put my hand on my chest and felt my pulse check in, solid and ordinary, and then the rain said what rain always says when I'm finally ready to listen: "You're inside, you're okay, go back to sleep." 2 days after the weather decided to practice drums on my fire escape, a woman from the district attorney's office left a message that sounded like she'd learned to speak in hallways. There'd be a hearing for the Venmo thing and the parking lot grab rolled together, a stack of papers becoming a smaller stack because someone stapled them. "You can write a statement, if you want," she said, like how people say you can step on the elevator that's already open. I sat at my kitchen table and opened my notes app and typed sentences that didn't try to be brave, they just tried to be true. I want distance. I want him to mean it when he leaves me alone. I want him to learn something that doesn't come at my expense. I printed it at the library down the block. The printer exhaled warm paper into my hands and the librarian with the cherry sweater from the post office nodded like we were conspirators again. Court this time was a different room with the same lemon cleaner and the same tired clock that keeps time like a sigh. The judge wore stripes instead of squares. The mustache officer gave me a little chin lift like we'd both been promoted to people who could keep our own bodies safe. He showed up with a public defender whose tie had a coffee stain shaped like a continent. He didn't look at me. He said no contest in a voice that was a stranger wearing his shoes. The judge talked in sentences that had windows in them. Probation, classes, no contact means no contact, even when your thumbs think they're smarter than the law. The stapler did its sharp little clack again and something in my shoulders listened. On the way out, I stopped at a bulletin board that said community in block letters punched out with a dull die. There was a flyer for a women's self-defense class in a gym I'd never noticed even though it's next to the laundromat where I always forget quarters. I stuck the little tear-off tab into my wallet like a promise I wasn't sure I could keep, and then I kept it. The gym smelled like rubber and lemon. Apparently that's the smell of anywhere I'm going to take myself seriously now. The instructor had a rope of hair down her back and a voice that didn't bother with permission. She showed us how to break a wrist grab by going for the thumb, not the whole hand. "You don't have to be stronger," she said, palms up like an offering. "You just have to know where the hinge is." When I tried it, my skin slid out of my friend partner's grip with this ridiculous little freedom pop and everyone clapped their palms together impulsively like we'd made a magic trick work. We learned how to say no with our throats and not just our text messages. The floor was a forgiving blue and my lungs felt bigger on it. After class I stood in front of my bookshelf in my apartment and realized it looked exactly like my brain had for months. Crowded, loyal to things that didn't deserve the spot they took up. I pulled down the dumb candle he'd bought me because it had my zodiac on the label and smelled like a fruit no one's actually eaten, and a t-shirt he'd left that used to be soft and now just felt like a problem, and a shoebox of old movie stubs where his thumbprint was still a smudge of oil on the corner. I put a blue piece of painter's tape on the box and wrote "Not yours anymore" in block letters. I took it to the donation center where people pile their old lives into plastic bins and hope someone else can make them useful. A woman with a barcode gun beeped it in like it was groceries and said, "Cute bracelet." I said, "Thanks," and didn't tell her I'd bought it myself. He didn't stop trying to be clever. A postcard showed up without a return address with a picture of a lighthouse on one side and nothing on the other but my name and the word "please." The officer said that counted. I handed it over at the precinct where the vending machine only takes cash and the light above the complaint desk flickers like it's uncertain it should be working this hard. "We've got it," the officer said, and slid the card into a plastic sleeve like evidence on TV. I walked past the station to the park and sat on a metal bench that still remembered the sun and watched a girl teach her dog to jump over a stick. He missed twice and then cleared it, surprised by his own legs. He did that thing dogs do where they look back at you like, "Did you see me?" I did. I saw me, too. My neighbor Joan came over with basil from her windowsill in the unself-conscious way only people over 60 can knock, insistently, like there's no universe where you won't want company. We made pasta that tasted like summer pretending to be spring and ate it standing up because my table still had a drop cloth on it from when I painted away a scuff on the wall that turned out to be an entire wall. She said, "I never gave a damn for long about my first marriage," and then we both laughed until we had to grip the counter. I gave her back her spare key and she put it on a ring with a tiny flashlight that clicked like a tiny enough yes. I moved one thing and then I moved everything. The couch that had been living against the wall got to try on the window, and the window liked it. The rug turned 90 degrees and my whole apartment remembered it had a long side. I slept one night with my bed on the other wall, just to see if my dreams could take a new route, and woke up feeling like someone had changed all the signs to point straight ahead for once. In the morning, the light hit the padlock charm and made a square of brightness on my wrist, and I sat there and let my coffee go lukewarm so I could watch it be a tiny stage. His mother mailed a letter on paper that had tiny pressed flowers along the edge, which I didn't know you could even buy anymore, unless you're the kind of person who has a drawer for napkins with seasons on them. I recognized her hand from a birthday card years ago, neat and patient. She said he'd pleaded, he'd started a course with a counselor who asked hard questions, that she wouldn't call again. "I know the order," she wrote. "I wanted you to know the boy I raised is in there. I hope the man he's trying to become never has to touch your life again." I didn't answer. I put the letter in the box with my passport and the title to my car, the paper things you only take out when you have two, and then, an hour later, I took it back out and slid it behind a kitchen cabinet like every apartment needs at least one secret no one will bother to find. At the mall, the attendant saw me before I saw her. She pointed at her lanyard where the tiny lightning bolt keychain I'd given her had been joined by a little enamel padlock someone else must have thought she deserved. "Look," she said, proud the way people get when they've survived a Tuesday. We split a soft pretzel and she told me she'd gotten a raise because she diffused a return that could have been World War III, and I told her I'd learned to peel a grip off at the thumb. She tested me and I laughed when my hand slipped away easily, the both of us in the middle of the corridor like a before and after photo no one thought to take. My brother dropped off a cat carrier and said, "Just try fostering," like he was offering me a sample of yogurt at the grocery store. Thunder, as the little card on her cage said, was mostly gray except for one white paw like she'd stepped in paint by mistake and then decided that's who she was now. She slept tucked into the crook of my knees with the arrogant contentment of someone who doesn't know rent exists. Sometimes she puts a soft paw on the lightning bolt like she's checking its pulse. When she jumps down, the bell on her collar makes a polite little noise that never forgets itself. The building's fire alarm screeched one afternoon because someone on the 4th floor tried to make grilled cheese without the grill or the cheese, judging by the smell. We all filed out onto the sidewalk in our elastic waistband pants and our smushed down hair and our neighbor voices, and the son was a loud, bright kid who didn't apologize. Joan squeezed my arm and whispered, "We're okay," like she was letting me in on a secret I already knew. And when we shuffled back in after the firefighters did that noble nothing they do, I hung my keys on their hook and it sounded like rain sounds when you're exactly where you belong. On my day off I went to a pottery studio because the self-defense teacher said I needed to put my hands on things that won't flinch. The clay was cold and had its own stubborn ideas, and the wheel hummed under my foot like a machine that trusted me if I could just keep my touch steady. The instructor showed me how to pull a wall up from a lump. "Don't force it," she said. "Invite it." I made a bowl that looked like a bowl if you squinted and a little dish that looked like a small planet someone sat on. I pressed a tiny lightning scratch into the side with a toothpick because being literal has become my kink. When I slid it onto the shelf to dry, I wrote my name on the masking tape in letters that didn't apologize for being there. After dinner one night, the good omelet again, basil on everything like I'm trying to be a person who grows herbs on purpose, I sat at my table with a stack of envelopes and wrote my own address in the top left corner in permanent marker. I changed my email, my bank questions, set passwords that weren't inside jokes with people who don't get to be inside anymore. It was tedious and slow and felt like brushing every tooth on the back side and front. I put a sticky note on my door that says take your keys like I've become my own roommate, the reliable one who waters the plants and turns off the stove and leaves the porch light on. I keep seeing the little boy from the estate sale in my head, the way he named his plastic dinosaur Thunder like he'd just invented weather. In the grocery line yesterday he could have been 1,000 other little boys, pointing at the conveyor belt like it was a stage. The woman in front of me had a cake with frosting that looked like a swimming pool and 2 cartons of strawberries. My cart had eggs and a basil plant and a plastic sleeve and a 6-pack of seltzer I'll forget to put in the fridge until I want one. The cashier had nails painted the green of new things trying very hard. "Any coupons?" she asked, and I said, "No, thanks," and it felt like telling the truth about something bigger. At night the quiet is still quiet, but now it's the kind that's full of other apartments breathing. I hear the elevator whir and someone's laugh climb the stairwell and the upstairs neighbor's pipes complain like they're being dramatic on purpose. Thunder dreams and twitches in a way that makes me feel like there is a whole other world happening that has nothing to do with me and will keep happening no matter what. The bolt and the padlock rest just above my pulse in a small council. When I slide the deadbolt home, it makes that not metallic click I've come to know by heart. It's just a sound, nothing romantic, nothing that belongs in a jewelry store commercial. It sounds like exactly what it is, a hinge and a decision, an ordinary door doing the only job it has and doing it well. I can live with that. I am.